And for the very brave, there is the example of the mayor of Seoul, which I just think was stunning, who decided, because his city lacked any kind of iconic centre and was so dominated by this massive 6-lane highway that went through the centre of his city, built in the 1970s, he would just rip it out. Ripped it out in its entirety and uncovered, running below it, the Cheong stream, which had previously been a more major river through the centre of the city, and has restored that and opened it up as a lovely sort of tourist route, but actually majorly used by the citizens of Seoul, and found, as a complete surprise, one of the side effects of this change is that it's reduced the ambient temperature at the peak summer point in the city by 3 degrees by creating a channel of cool air blowing through the city. But that, not for the faint-hearted, any mayor who wants to follow that sort of example. This is the kind of slide that I would get killed for if anybody from our marketing team were here. I apologise, I wasn't clever enough to try and work out to make this more, a bit simpler to read. But the point it's trying to make is, okay, shift to public transport, cycling and walking, which I should have said something more about. But in many places, and indeed everywhere, car travel is going to carry on. And in many places, and I suspect in Norway, people, from what I've seen, particularly places like Norway, going to still be a significant part of the transport system, even in 20 or 30 years' time. Then, in order to achieve climate change and sustainability goals, we have to move away from petrol, diesel derived engines. There are a couple of, and there's huge investment going into the electric vehicle industry at the moment all over the world, particularly in China and in the States. But there are two things that are often said that will be real blockages to electric vehicles. The first, of course, is that the electric vehicle is only as green as the grid that supplies it. Not a problem in Norway. You'd have virtually zero carbon vehicles straight away if you move to electric vehicles. But even in a place, a real laggard on renewable energy like Britain, even in Britain, this rather overcomplicated graph just seeks to show that on the left-hand side, the current emissions from an electric vehicle operating in Britain is lower than virtually everything other than a plug-in hybrid model that's currently available on the market, and particularly the gas or diesel models which most people drive. The second big criticism is, okay, electric vehicles are fine in big, densely populated urban areas for people who just want to potter about for a few miles, but the range typically is no more than 60 or 100 miles, and therefore they're not suitable for the kind of journeys that people, if they don't make every day, they want to have the capacity to make when and where they like. I don't know the situation here, but certainly in the UK, the average, over 90% of trips are under 50 miles. So that actually isn't a problem if you can convince people psychologically. But actually, there's technology now available that will obviate the charging problem altogether. I need to do a caveat here. This is a company that Arup has just bought, but it's called Halo IPT, and they've developed an inductive power transfer, as they call it, but basically it means wireless charging of vehicles, a transponder in the ground and under the vehicle, which means that on technology that's already available and being used in Italy, in Genoa and Turin for their bus systems, vehicles can charge when they're stationary at traffic lights or in bus stops or back at the depot. But there's no reason over time why that shouldn't mean that you can have transponders all the way along the roadway, so your vehicle is constantly charging at any point that it's stationary for any short period of time. And we think that this technology, it will completely obviate the need for rather expensive plug-in power generation equipment that's being trialled in the UK and elsewhere. It also, from a kind of transport planner's point of view, it has the great advantage that you can install little data centres in the inductive chargers so that you're amassing a huge amount of data about vehicle movements the whole time they're moving around. But from the driver's point of view also, that's an opportunity to send information to the driver about forthcoming traffic problems. So I've started with land use planning and transport, but actually in most developing world cities, transport's probably 20, 25, some places 30% of overall carbon footprint. Usually the biggest contributor in developed world cities is from energy used in buildings, in some places as high. Hong Kong, for example, where I'm going on to tomorrow, 70 or 80% of emissions use. There are now, a huge array of technologies that allow the buildings that we've built over the last 40 or 50 years that have been built on the assumption of very cheaply available fossil fuels to provide heating and cooling that have meant that building design has been able to concentrate on the aesthetics, maybe not in some places, but generally on the aesthetics, and not the thermal efficiency that now allow you to retrofit for those buildings on the assumption that the business case isn't strong, and indeed the carbon case strong for knocking down and rebuilding, so that most building stock that's here today will still be in place in 2050, but we can retrofit it and greatly reduce its emissions. In the UK, for a home, the average reduction with fairly cheap technologies is about 30%, but we think we can get up to 50% or so reduction in energy demand through changes to the infrastructure of the building and sometimes building management systems. There are many cities, as Ken mentioned, that have got big programs of retrofit now. Toronto's the biggest I've seen, where the mayor has a plan to retrofit all of the tower blocks in the city, which are home to 60% of the population over the next 20 years, in a huge partnership between the major private sector landlords and the cities. And I could go on and give hundreds of other examples. But the thing I really wanted to pause on is how one achieves that, not from a technical point of view, because the technologies are actually pretty basic and pretty simple and pretty widely used, but from the point of view, the sort of logistical and financial point of view. The big problem in most cities who are my clients is they look at the figures and say, yes, building retrofit, fantastic, going to deliver our carbon emissions reduction, and it's got a payback because 10 or 15 years down the line, we'll be saving so much money from those buildings, it'll pay for itself. Problem is, we haven't got the capital up front to pay for those works. Maybe not a problem here in one of the richest countries in the world, but it may be different for different local authorities. I don't know how your financing system works. But the model that's now being rolled out quite successfully in a number of cities, starting in Berlin, now copied in London and elsewhere, is one of energy performance contracting, where effectively the city forms a partnership with a private energy contractor. The private contractor agrees to put up all of the capital costs of retrofitting public buildings in return for a guaranteed share of the energy savings translated into euros or whatever over the years until they've paid off the cost of the capital cost plus whatever 10-15% rate of profit. A slight twist on that model is being applied in London, where largely public investment is going in the first place, but a contracting system has been set up that ties the payments to the contractors to the level of energy reduction that they achieve. But it's showing very significant results in the places where I've seen it working in terms of carbon reduction, but also in terms of some other factors. So in the small northern town of Kirklees in Yorkshire, in England, they've undergone the retrofit of all of the homes in the whole town that wanted to have it, mainly privately owned, going around knocking on the doors and offering to come in and retrofit the homes, put in new insulation completely for free, handle all of the logistics of that, also completely for free, at a cost to the council from which they've borrowed. But on the basis that their initial trial showed that for every £1 that the council spends retrofitting homes, £4 is returned to the local economy, in terms of jobs created locally, and those jobs tend to stay locally because it's local contractors who do the work, but also most people spend the extra disposable income, the extra 200 or 300 euros a year that they get from reduced energy bills directly in the local economy, in the local shops. So it has a great multiplier effect. The other good thing I've seen about this, and this is mainly from a London example, is the extent to which this sort of contracting is enabling collaboration between cities. In London, all of the public authorities have clubbed together to create a single procurement framework for building retrofit in London. A year-long process going through the normal European Union procurement methods. That means they've now got 12 consortia of international companies who've committed to be available to carry out building retrofit programs across the public sector in London. Each individual council or hospital or school or whatever will contract separately now that framework is set up, but they won't have to go through a year-long process themselves each time they procure. They can do it in 6 weeks. It's a huge savings in terms of bureaucracy. Huge savings in terms of they pooled their resources to manage what was an extremely complicated procurement. Most of the individual entities didn't have the knowledge about energy performance contracting or indeed about their buildings and energy management to have done it on their own. So huge benefit in that collaborative arrangement. But also they've now created a standard for building retrofit for London, which means that each time they do procure, it's very simple. Every company is competing against a standard assessment about what different technologies will deliver and the relative costs of those technologies, which means they basically compete in terms of price on their efficiency in delivering against that relatively set framework. So moving on, land use planning, transport, building retrofit, renewable energy installation. Well, in most of the cities that I've worked in, at least, there's actually relatively limited opportunity for generation of energy from renewables within the city, simply because cities tend to be pretty dense places where land is very expensive and unavailable. However, there is opportunity for micro-renewables, particularly building integrated renewables, and that's an area which in many countries has been a pretty slow progress until very recently. And again, slightly complicated slide, but this is an illustration of the impact in Britain of the feed-in tariff legislation, which we've copied from Germany and Spain. And essentially, what it shows is on this diagram, the sort of green bars are the investment hurdle, i.e. the return that a private contractor would seek to be able to deliver different types of renewable technology, numbered 1 to 20, and the blue diamonds are what we estimate with the impact of the feed-in tariff that the government has brought in, essentially a premium price paid for electricity generated by renewable energy, what the internal rate of return will now be for those technologies. And for all 20 of the ones listed here, they weren't commercially viable until the feed-in tariff was brought in. So the only reason they were implemented was essentially by the public sector because it was doing good. You now find, looking across that list, that the vast majority of them are now very commercially viable, in some cases returns that are a bit more than the government intended, in the 15 or 20%. And so we're starting to see a huge, huge increase in renewable energy uptake at a micro level in the UK, as Germany and Spain have also experienced. Of course, that only will have a relatively limited effect. In my estimate, in sort of London, is micro-renewables can deliver at most about 5% of London's carbon reduction target. An area, however, where there is often much greater potential is in waste management. An area which is a problem for most cities, waste normally treated as a big problem to be got rid of, got out of the city, dumped in the ground, burnt, whatever, but now being seen much more as a resource, particularly in the developing world. The image here is from Sao Paulo. It's a slum area called Parasopolis in the centre of the city. 11% of the 20 million people in Sao Paulo live in places like this, despite the relative wealth of the city now. No proper sewage, only illegal connection to the electricity grid, and huge, huge problems of waste. No proper waste management collection creates tremendous health and pollution problems. Sao Paulo's now gone down the route through the Clean Development Mechanism funding process of capturing a large quantity of its waste, and now claims to be generating 25% of its electrical energy demand within the city through the capture of gas from landfill from its waste, through about 20 million euros raised initially through the Clean Development Mechanism. So a big success story in one respect, in a transformation of that city.